Hi, everyone. Thank you, first of all, to Yash and Luke and the QB Division team for inviting me here today. I think we're all in agreement that this is a bit of a pivotal moment. I feel like this moment has been brewing for many, many years, and structured data is not a new concept. The concepts of data governance and data good housekeeping and the ways that data can be consumed and used is also not news. It's not new stuff. And as everyone's saying, the technology exists. What really we're seeing is that there is a huge amount of barriers, actually, from a regulatory perspective and also from a human culture perspective. So those two things are the things that we really need to really work on together to focus on the next generation of drugs and treatments coming to market, and to make that burden of regulatory, really reduce as much as we possibly can, because the existing model is not fit for purpose for the modern world and for patient access. So really, I work with a group of members of BioPhorum who are across industry, and we look at the challenges of regulatory, in particular, we're starting with regulatory CMC, and some of those challenges are directly solutioned and helped and enabled by the people in this room. So the way I look at it is that we are all here with a mission to improve patient access, and we all have a role to play in that. And so the challenge currently from a regulatory perspective is about divergence to convergence. So this is actually FDA language, it's not our language, it's really a global ambition to move from what we have today, which is essentially where patients are around the world, but the regulatory environment doesn't reflect that the product quality and the product is essentially the same drug wherever the patient gets the drug. But the regulations don't reflect that. So this admin burden, as I call it is admin. Essentially, this reporting and ability to communicate effectively is really hindered by what we have today. So it really requires a whole-scale, evolution, disruption, transformation of the regulatory environment. And of course, that doesn't happen in isolation. So it happens across industry, it happens across regulators, and really working together is essential and key and critical to this whole solutioning of where we're going to go next. So this is the slide that I like to use, which kind of anchors a lot of the problem statement, if you like. So if you look at the top right-hand corner, it's one product, one standard, one submission, one review. It's utopia. This is a heavily political environment. It's government agencies. These are patient safety regulations. That's why they exist. They exist to protect patients. They're there to prove that the drugs that are coming to market are efficacious and safe. And that's why the regulatory department takes their job very, very seriously, because that's what they do. They are basically proving to the regulators that these drugs are of the sufficient quality and are effective and are going to be actually improving patients' outcomes. And so that ambition is an ambition, but it's a moonshot. It's something that we want to get to. And it was really driven by the fact that the COVID vaccine showed that when everyone did come together and united across a common purpose, that it could be done, and it was done, and things were done that had never been done before. And that really was the kind of driver for everybody in industry going, and the regulators saying, okay, we may not want to replicate that situation, but we do have an ambition not to go back to how it was, because how it was isn't working for anybody, including the regulators. And so the quality of the product does not depend on where the patient is. This is really, really critical and super true for cell and gene therapy and for ATMP, new modalities coming through. If you have a rare disease, they don't conveniently sit in large cohorts in a single market like the FDA or the EMA. They are spread around the world, and if you're trying to deal with 33 multi-market submissions, and each one has a completely different system and requirements and data and everything you have to serve up, sometimes it's language, it can be all kinds of requirements, that really is hindering progress, and it's hindering reinvestment of the smaller startups who are bringing these technologies to market. So this is a really big problem, and actually called out by the FDA themselves at recent conferences. So it's recognized. We all know what the problem is, and there is a absolute alignment between regulators, industry, and the whole ecosystem to solution this. Everyone really wants the same thing because it benefits everybody, including patients. And so I wanted today to give kind of a bit of an overview of where I see some leadership in this area, which is really FDA have some great materials publicly available, and they publish, and they're very clear and very transparent in the way that they communicate what they're trying to do, which is quite refreshing in some respects. And so they are very much about digitalization. They have the same problem as everyone else. You know, they can't accelerate their review without compromising the compliance and safety of that review unless they are using technology to do that. And so the solutioning of data-driven CEDA review or FDA review is now happening, and they are looking to basically collaborate across the global ecosystem that you saw before with ICH, with EMA, FPA, and others, to really drive this global harmonized approach to submissions and actually have a single submission model as far as possible. Okay, so this slide again, I think, has a really great, why? Why would we invest? Why would we bother? Why would we do all of this stuff? And really it's about, FDA saying we want to go from submission to collaboration. If we take away and automate and kind of get rid of the simple, kind of admin tasks, we can then focus on the really important, useful stuff. And we can have better interactions, we can have better conversations, and we can understand exactly, I think Dan was saying it about, they can now, survey their kind of data and really see the spikes of where they need to go and poke a bit further and investigate if necessary, or ask questions. So this is where they're looking to become more partnership in their communication. At the moment, the FDA model is really difficult. I mean, you're allowed to ask, 2 questions, and it's, I always use the analogy, if I'm standing and if I'm sitting on a Teams call and we're interacting, within half an hour, we could get further than it would take us months or even years or ever to get through email conversation, chat. But that's kind of what we're, fixed into at the moment. So there's a real necessity to actually, do things in a better way from a, collaboration perspective. And then from documents to data. So the current ICH M4Q guideline was written when it was documents, and now they're writing it, revising it 23 years later for data. And they're not going to mandate how that data should look or what it looks like, but the FDA is moving towards structured data, and I'm going to come on to that in a few slides more. And then this piece around multi-regulator, regulator-specific, this is the critical key thing, because it's great having all the technology enablement, but actually you've got to have the regulators agree that they all will take the same information in the same way, pretty much. And so there's a company or an organization, not-for-profit, called Accumulus Synergy, who are working on that platform, the solution for enabling multi-market submissions, and they have a regulator forum, so they work directly with regulators, and it's really again about that goal of solving the burden of regulatory for everybody and making it just more streamlined and efficient for everyone. And then fixed formats to more dynamic standards. I'm not going to go into that too much, but I think there's also standards is just a huge piece of the puzzle, and again something that we all should be discussing and really socializing to understand what that looks like. Again, the FDA are working with FHIR, HL7, on their kind of next generation of structured data submissions. So that's something to be mindful of. So I wanted to give a couple of examples. And again, this is PQ CMC, so product quality CMC, will substantially change the submission process. It's going to necessitate new business processes and infrastructure for both FDA and industry. So this is something that is coming and has been happening for quite a few years. And this is the most recent, more recent thinking from the FDA or publication from the FDA. So they have got a red box that says that this would be a mandatory legal requirement. But the reason it's in red is because, having checked with some real experts on this, none of us are very clear on what that actual final guidance is. So the FDA, this is a very dynamic, evolving, moving field, and they may or may not stick to that, but at the moment that's the information we have. So their thinking is, their direction of travel is to make it mandatory. My belief is that they're looking to align with ICH on that kind of work, and therefore involve industry as well and make sure that there's more collaboration rather than saying, here you go, deliver a standard that nobody can comply with. I think there's much more around, being able to engage with industry. So, and they are very much talking about alignment, global harmonization with the overall structured product quality submissions initiative led by ICH as well. So again, what they're planning to do is continue that external collaboration. That's a very strong, consistent, clear mandate and message from the FDA. And where the FDA leads, others will follow, is really what's happening. So you've got these kind of, again, ecosystem. You've got, EMA in there, ICH, and ICH M4Q is the first, as I say, first part of the kind of CMC regulatory submission piece that will deal with structured data and take it up to structured data. So it's getting ready for. So if you want to focus anywhere, then it's the ICH M4Q stuff, as well as IDMP, and I'll come back to IDMP in a second. So continuing internal collaboration, obviously you can see that they have a big organization themselves. They have a lot of people, a lot of departments, a lot of silos in principle. And so they have to bring themselves together as well and decide what they want to be doing. And then I guess you can see there's a draft PQ CMC guidance. That could also be the draft of the final that we're referencing in that red box. But we're going to dig into that a bit more as the members to see and actually probably engage with the FTA just to find out what that means. So the challenges, and I thought this was quite useful for this group, is obviously the diversity and the dynamic nature of all of the different organisations that are part of this. And then these gaps. So again, we're talking about controlled vocabulary. Again, it's kind of back to that master data management piece, because IDMP was the initiative that sought to basically create a data framework, master data model that would enable global surveillance. And the first thing that they did was for safety pharmacovigilance, which obviously when the COVID vaccines were being rolled out was absolutely super critical, because you can only trend and analyse data when it's in one data set really at scale and in an effective way. So the first step to that was having IDMP and agreeing what that naming convention should be, and that's no easy thing in its in its first iteration. So that's taken a few years, but it's really gathering steam, and sponsored by ISO as well. So what they're recommending is you can get Google Alerts on PQ, CMC, IDMP, ISO, SPOR, which is the EMA group. Collect and organise your data. Apply master data concepts. I think this is all great because it's really speaking the same language. Everyone agrees on what needs to be done, and then it's a case of actually we all agree. But here's some great steer from the FDA as to these are the priorities that we see. And then obviously simple things like data cleansing, QC curation. So it's just good data management to help with the structured data consumption by FDA and ultimately what they will be asking for in terms of structured data submissions. So what I'm going to say in the next few slides is really what we're working on and how that really supports industry. Because actually at BioPhorum we have members, but members take on the responsibility to innovate on behalf of all of biopharma industry. And that is how we operate. So we have key priorities that were identified by our members, and this is really to drive that transformation of the ecosystem. And so it's a group that's really regulatory for regulatory itself, and really being able to focus on things like harmonization, filing and review, the interactions with health authorities, digitalization, and ensuring that we have a really good voice of industry representing all patients, whether that be a handful of patients all the way up to bigger cohorts. But every patient really matters in the model. So we have some work streams, some topics that we're really digging into and working on. And so we have ICH M4Q, as I say, that has a timeline imperative that we have to do something here because we have to get ready. So we're working on that as a group, bringing together experts to look at creating this future-proof guideline, really engaging with the expert working group, ICH, with FIRE, HL7, with CDISC, which is a standards organization, all the good people who know this stuff and what is what's next really in terms of what will happen after ICH M4Q, which is structured data essentially requirements. So that's the next step for ICH M4Q will be the requirements of that, the implications of that will be structured data for that area of submissions. And there's other pieces that we're working on. So there's a lot to work on. There's a lot to do in regulatory, because regulatory is the last part. I always say it's the last part of the value chain of a pharma company that really is really ready for transformation. And there's so much work that can be done to bring so much value to really hit that goal of getting drugs to patients more quickly. So I'm not going to go into the charters, they're quite busy, but I just wanted to show you that we basically create a charter, we bring people together, the brightest minds across industry, and really work together to solve the challenges of, and collectively we will go back to ICH and give them our feedback, making sure that the, again, biopharma industry, and particularly smaller companies, smaller treatments, patients, are fully represented, because that's not always the case when you're dealing with an entire pharmaceutical industry. Biopharma may or may not be, it's more challenging, so sometimes it gets less focus, less experience. And so we make sure that that's going to be part of the feedback, the input, the engagement to ICH, so they factor that into the guideline. And also we're going to create a summary paper which is about how do we then get it from the guideline, how do you take this guideline and then make that happen in your own organisation, because that's going to mean change, it's going to mean new ways of working. So that's kind of a best practices guideline that we will publish externally for consumption by all of industry. And again, it's kind of that collaboration piece with FPIA and pharma and with the ICH expert working group as well. And then the second one we have is also structured data. So as I say, we kind of nicely segue into structured data, and then looking at specifically the challenges. And again, we agree what we need to do and where we need to focus, because structured data is a whole big topic. But actually, it's really, you know, what are we going to be doing to get ready for the next, you know, really driven by what's happening in the regulatory environment. Where do we need to focus our attention? Which bits of structured data do we need, and what would we want to get out of it? So that's something we're exploring next week. So we're bringing together our first ever meeting next week. I have Joschke and Luke coming to come and talk about QBD vision, because the group will find that really, really useful and interesting. And so what we're doing next week is really bringing together pieces of the puzzle that are meaningful for transformation of the regulatory ecosystem. So we have Accumulus Synergy, who are developing this, or have developed a global platform for globally harmonized regulatory submissions. Amazing work that they're doing there. And working directly with FTA on that. They're a not-for-profit, so they are working directly with FTA and FHIR to enable that seamless, seamless transmission of information to multiple markets, and a single press of a button, and you have maybe 30 regulators all saying yes, hopefully, or probably asking more questions. And then we have CDISC, as I say, is an amazing organisation, again, not-for-profit, who have worked directly with FTA, but mainly on clinical standards, data standards, and they have done a lot of work in that area. They also work globally in cooperation with many other standards organisations within the ecosystem. So they're a really, really great resource as well to understand more about where we've done stuff in other areas, but again, can be applied for regulatory CMC. And then, as I say, we've got Bayer and QBD Vision coming to talk about how QBD Vision supports, the CMC data pool, and I'm sure there's a lot more to it, but yeah, I won't steal their thunder. So you can see what we're doing. Basically, we come together we bring like-minded people together to really drive, the mission, the vision, and for the benefit of all patients, all industry. And yeah, thank you very much for your time. I'm happy for any questions.
Thank you very much. Okay. Brilliant talk. All right, we're going to continue to the next speaker, which is Keir. She has 12 years of life science experience and works as a consultant in the quality and compliance space for the pharma and biotech industry. Her aim is to bring digital technology and data analytics to business excellence. She's a key member of ISPE and PDE, and within PDE, she's on the regulatory and quality board. Today, she will focus on the authority guidance that we need to put into best practices. And I think this is a perfect connection to BioPhorum, because this is the mission that BioPhorum is actually going for, right? And today we're going to talk about what are the obstacles and how we're going to get there. Please welcome.
Okay, yeah, oh, it did work. Hi, everyone. It's so incredible to be here. Yash, thank you. Thank you to you and your team for having me again for this second annual summit. I'm certainly incredibly humbled to be standing in front of all of you. I will do my very best. Particularly, I understand now we have a teacher of data governance, and so that's pretty fascinating to me. I'm definitely going to bother you later. So we're here to talk about what to do on Monday. So I'm actually amazed that I actually heard the words data governance today during this summit. I'm usually the most unpopular person in the room, and I don't typically hear those words. So just to understand a little bit about me, I started in data integrity remediation. So I lived overseas for about 6 years, buried under warning letters, untitled letters, 43s, you probably know what they are, liaisoning with health authorities, leadership, shop floor, trying to solve the problem, the data integrity problem. And during the course of that time, as most of you probably know, that's really when data governance emerged from the health authority perspective to really start to think about how to holistically address the data integrity problem and really avoid the things that we were seeing at that time. I'll rocket forward to now I do serve on the RAQAB board for PDA. I head up their data integrity interest group, their big data task force, oversee some technical reports. And really all that means is that I get to sit in the room with the smartest people in the world, both on the health authority side and in industry. So I get to be a sponge, and hopefully that gives me a little bit of a qualification to stand up here today. So we're going to look at data governance, the missing link. We're going to ask the question, what is data governance really? We're going to have a little cautionary tale about don't be ungovernable. And what to do on Monday. There's a lot of theory out there. There's probably a lot of different opinions on what data governance is. But we really all need to know, what can we do Monday when we get back to work? So data everywhere, but not a drop to drink. So just a little anecdote. I got hired recently to support a client that licenses a biologic for rare disease. And the biologic was withdrawn from the market without their knowledge, and patients are suffering. And so what they asked us to do is figure out, because they're not experts in data, what went wrong, and could it have been prevented, and can they take over the asset and keep it going because there's patients that are in need. And so of course we said, yes, we're happy to look. And so we began to collect data. And we began to work our way back into development data, back to 2013, and I want you to know we can't solve the problem. Not because it's not solvable, but we can't understand the data, we can't find the data, nobody knows where the data is, it's too much data. That is the problem. As part of looking at this data, we looked at case reports, and I was sitting in my kitchen, and as you know, when you get buried in a task and you sort of forget everything else, and all of a sudden it said, 34-year-old female, I get a little choked up here, pregnant, and it started to talk about morbidity and what was happening to her as a result of this biologic being pulled off the market, and it got very, very real for me all of a sudden. Data management, patient, data management, patient. I'm grateful for that because I'm human, and it's important for me also always to understand the direct link between what I do and the patient. So when I think of data everywhere, I think of the fact that a lot of times we can't use it, and a lot of times that's a critical problem. On the other hand, we're also all talking about a lot of cool stuff, right? So if you're working in pharma, if you're working in software, certainly for me, I hear all kinds of things people want to do with data. We have compliance and data integrity. We have accelerated operations, advanced and predictive analytics, digital threads, digital fabrics. Sue and I were talking, and she actually said this first. She said, press the button submissions. I thought I was the only one who said that. So cool. And so we need a button, right, to kind of remind ourselves. We want to be able to press the button on submissions. Supply chain resilience, drug shortage prevention, innovation, quality and operational intelligence, artificial intelligence, machine learning, just to name a few. However, we don't talk a lot about data governance. Why is that? And if you're in the data governance space like I am, it's a hard sell. So what is data governance really? And I'll be very interested to hear from the professor from Texas later on this topic. Data governance, there's a regulatory perspective. And could I just ask a quick show of hands? How many people here are very familiar with regulatory expectations for data governance? That's good to know, so I know the audience. So just so you know, right around 2014, health authorities kind of came together and they issued a plethora of guidance documents talking about data governance and what is it in pharma. And you can see here, if you're familiar with PICS, this tends to be the working definition across the board from a regulatory perspective. The arrangements to ensure that data, irrespective of the format in which they are generated, recorded, processed, retained, and used to ensure the record throughout the data lifecycle. Basically, data governance equals data integrity. That is the regulatory lens. And it is a requirement and there are expectations. On the other hand, if you're familiar with data governance, what I call the business model, it is a little bit different. And I use DAMA. How many people here are familiar with DAMA, DMBOK? Yeah, me and you. So you want to get your hands on this. So DAMA is pretty fascinating. And I stumbled across it because of my work in data governance. And I was pretty surprised to realize that the regulatory definition of data governance was very narrow. Actually quite shocked. And as I got more involved with digital transformation, I began to realize that the regulatory definition of data governance is actually not even enough. It's not going to get us there. So that's very interesting. However, data integrity is essential, it's critical, and we need to comply. So as we move through this presentation, I just want to keep both those things in mind. And just to dive in a little bit deeper, data governance, I call it the quality and compliance model. I'll let you know that at the GMP by the C conference, I was yelled at by FDA for doing that, so I don't recommend you do it either, but it helps me keep it separate. And when we look at this model, we're really thinking about GXP data. So a lot of times, even if you want to get in the door, you're going to have to address the fact that leadership mostly is probably going to be interested in GXP data, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, and Alcoa Plus. When you look at the slide here, I don't know if you can see it, but I pulled out the domains that are specific to the regulatory guidance. So these are explicitly pulled from those guidance, shared across guidance. There's really no difference from country to country. Quality culture, just so you know, the PICS guide mentions quality culture 60 times. Prior to that, no other guidance ever mentioned quality culture. So we can thank data governance for really bringing into the fold this huge attention we have on quality culture now, which is so needed. Data lifecycle, data integrity risk assessments. If you're not familiar with those, again, explicitly described in guidance, and they include data mapping and process mapping. And we're going to talk about that. But remember, regulators are expecting this. We did a recent inspection, and I want you to know that FDA asked explicitly for these maps from our client. That was the first time that I had ever had that experience. Data criticality, know your data, know how critical it is. Data ownership, detection, correction, and prevention. Data governance from a regulatory perspective is very focused on being able to detect, correct, and prevent data integrity issues. And of course, we're probably all familiar with Alcoa Plus. Now on the business side, this gets very interesting to me and provocative. And this comes from DAMA, by the way. You can see data governance sits in the middle of really quite a different set of domains. That's where you start to see data modeling and design. This is kind of what we're hearing here today. Data storage and operations, data security, metadata, data integration and interoperability, document and content management, data warehouse and business intelligence, data architecture, and data quality. I love that DAMA talks about data quality. If you're following regulatory trends, EMA released last year a guidance on data quality. Data quality and data integrity are not the same. I'm not certain industry knows that yet. Very different things, and when we think of digital transformation, we want to begin to understand the differences in those two terms. Data culture. I talk a lot about data culture. I'm kind of one of the few. I have to give Yash a lot of credit for trying to help me spread this message. Data culture right now is not the same as quality culture. I hope at some point these two are one, but a data culture is very different. To sort of simplify what I mean by that, you can have quality culture, you can have compliance with data integrity and a digital solution, for example, a LIMS system. In a quality culture and compliant environment, I can create manual workarounds as long as they're compliant. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that from a quality and compliance perspective, but it wrecks our digital strategy, these manual workarounds. And on the shop floor, they're happening. As we try to appeal to leadership and help them transform, at the shop floor, these things are happening all the time. Manual workarounds, using comment fields to store information that are not queryable. This is how we drift as a culture, and we start to really create deficiencies in our digital strategy, even though technically we're compliant. Glossaries, ontologies, data catalogs, we're talking a lot about that. I like to just say, keep it simple. I have clients now that are talking about, has anybody heard of proactive initiatives? It's a new feature. I think it's in Viva. So it's not a CAPA, it's not a change control, it's not a process improvement, but it's something. And they're using it. Why? Keep it simple. Nobody knows what that is. When I work with my clients, I tell them all the time, nobody knows what that is. FDA doesn't know what that is. Somebody was talking about, I think, organizations always wanting to be unique, and I get it. But know where to draw the line. Know where it just makes the most sense to speak the language that everyone, especially the regulators, are speaking. So that's DOM in case you're not familiar with it. You can Google that. Structured data, keep it simple. I know we all want to use AI. I know we all want to use NLP and see what's out there. But let's just start, keep it simple, and get the value that we know we can get from, for example, implementing structured data. AI will come. It's my personal opinion. So, and just so you know, so I mentioned that EMA had released their data quality guidance, and there's an excerpt in there, and it says, semantic interoperability and standardization are out of scope of this guidance. Does anybody know what that means? Basically, what it means is all the things that are best practices to really digitally transform are out of scope of this guidance. And that's okay, because I get it. We don't necessarily want to put regulatory requirements, but we should know as a business these are essential. We do not want to separate the business from quality. And when you're trying to make that case, it's important, I think, to be able to speak that language, or what are the two different types of data governance models, so that you can help leadership and help the shop floor understand the difference, but understand why we need both. And if that's not enough, FDA explicitly says it. If you're familiar with the Quality Management Maturity Initiative, can I just, out of curiosity? Okay, so they explicitly say in organizations that exhibit mature quality management, that they do not separate business and quality objectives. They are linked together. End of story, drops mic, in my opinion. They're telling us, let's not separate this any longer. The other thing I might add is there's other types of non-GXP data that are valuable to us. When we work in the data integrity remediation space, when we're explicitly trying to prevent data integrity issues and understand a culture, we look at safety data and HR data. We look at attrition rates. We look at trends in how many people have left right before a data integrity issue, how many people have stayed after a data integrity issue. This tells us lots of things about how a company might be trending. But it's not GXP data necessarily. But if you want to be able to use it, And that's really my favorite thing to say when it comes to data. What do you want to do with it? Whether you're in development, research, if you're going to generate data, ask yourself a question. If I generated it, can I throw it out? And if my answer is not that I'm just going to throw it out, if my answer is I'm generating and I want to use it, we want to think about data governance to some degree. Don't be ungovernable. You guys are familiar with this campaign, right? Ungovernable. Everything everything should be ungovernable. If you were going to be cool, you're ungovernable. Not here. Not here. Rule the data or the data will rule you. I could give you endless case studies. If you do not rule that data will rule you. That data will tell a story to health authorities, and it won't be the story you want to tell. That's it. I deal with it every single day. Go slow to go fast. We'll talk a little bit about business process mapping, data flow maps, catalogs. I'm not quite sure what your experience is, but I hear all the time, we're too busy. We can't slow down. We're too fast. We're accelerated operations. The reality is, wait till you meet me. I always say you can meet me now or you can meet me later. When you meet me later, you don't even know what slow is until you're in remediation. You have no idea what slow is. Speak the same language. We talked a little bit about that. Proactive initiatives, boo, CAPAs. Yes, keep it simple. Keep it simple. More data, more problems. I love data. I have to be very honest with you. I really, really, really love data. And I love that we're collecting big data. And I love big data research. And I love AI. But we have to know when enough is enough. When I work on the shop floor, and I'll give you a very simple example, drop-downs. I call it the drop-down curse. When you give people the ability to add to that drop-down feature, it's unreal. Data integrity on a Sunday, when I wasn't feeling well, the moon was in an eclipse. They want to add every little detail to that drop-down. I think we, in some ways, when we think of data culture, it's helping people understand when less is more. I think you call it dimensionality reduction? Yes, that. Not my words. I just say keep it simple. But what data do I really need? Is it enough? Okay, so what to do on Monday? We're going to start at the beginning of this roadmap. Digital strategy. So I have heard people say, what is the digital strategy? What does leadership want to do? I usually find they don't have a hard time telling me that. I want an end-to-end digital thread. I want to be super fast. But then what I like to do is help them understand, but what does that really look like? I'm going to tell you true stories. I have a client, last year we started end-to-end thread coming out of a really robust discovery machine. We hit GMP, the GMP space on the build, and it was like the needle hit the record. Oh my gosh, Viva's so expensive. How long can we go on Google Docs? How about SharePoint? Everybody uses SharePoint, don't they? So it's helpful, in my opinion, to help leadership understand what that strategy is actually going to look like, what types of decisions they're actually going to have to make if they want to realize that strategy. What do you want to do? Intended use. I've heard that today too. Pick, right? We don't want to go in there and take advantage of every piece of legacy data you've ever created. Pick. What do you want to do? And start. I would say don't worry about getting it perfect, but just start. Start thinking about a glossary. Start thinking about what processes are in scope to achieve your objective, and just focus there. Cross-functional committee, I heard that here today as well. You definitely need to break down those silos and bring everyone together. It's definitely not the job of IT solely. It's definitely not the job of quality solely. We've heard, should data governance come top down or bottom up? Honestly, it's just everybody's role. I don't have that slide here today, but in our training, we put a pyramid together, and we like to show everybody in the organization where they sit in data governance, from analysts to leadership, because it actually is everybody's role. Now within there, obviously, we'll parse out roles and responsibilities, maybe create a center of excellence. People have different functions. But it's important our entire culture understand what their role is in a data governance structure. Information sessions, training, you can do that right away. It doesn't have to be a formal training. Have an information session. This is what data culture is. This is what we mean by it. Here's what we think you might need to do. Change management, what will that really look like? We don't want to just say you have a big change coming. Greenfields are fun because they don't think they need change management because they're new. And I always told them, are you kidding? You just hired 12 different legacy companies to head up your greenfield. You need change management right now before it's too late. Brass tacks, data governance policy. Definitely need a policy, definitely need procedures. We heard somebody talk about that. That's one pillar of standing up your program. You're definitely going to need these. Start speaking the same language. Again, pick an area and just start. Even now, even on the way here, on the flight, I asked a client to send me, this request, 1 year of deviations retrospectively. And I was working with Max, and Max sent me a spreadsheet of 13,000 lines that I couldn't do anything with. Funny enough, and totally randomly, the week before I asked for the same thing for a different department for training, and I received 10. And completely randomly, when I opened this spreadsheet, there were 2 more right in front of me that I didn't receive with the first list. So just start. That's what we have to do. Bridge and monitor the gap. This is my favorite thing to talk about. Leadership, shop floor, everyone in between. Think about what are the metrics or what are the ways in which you're actually going to bridge that gap and monitor your digital journey. What's actually happening? And I'll give you an example. Working with a client, we have ALM, Application Lifecycle Management, rolled out. It's paper on glass, to be very honest with you, for CSV activities. But I happened to notice that there was system audit trail review in there. And I thought, that's funny. I've never seen that in an ALM. And they said, well, we put it in there because that way the steps of audit trail review we just use the test scripts. So we've got a software application that has test scripts that somebody is now using to represent steps, quite frankly, from an SOP. And when something goes wrong, the procedure says you need a deviation, but the application says it's an IT incident. And so it's running into, this is a big company, a mature company. These are not, small startups. And they're running now in 2 different directions. Some folks have been putting things that go wrong in audit trail review. That's critical in an application lifecycle management tool, managing it as an incident. Others have been raising deviations. Just a small example. Monitoring that, I would ask, do we want to know that? Where does that go? Because that's a very clear example of something you want to get ahead of when you're enabling a digital strategy. But what do we even call that? And who wants to know about that? And so I would say things of that nature, examples of that nature, we need to start thinking about what are those metrics, what type of information do we want to collect as we bridge that gap and make sure that our strategies are, going as planned. Thank you. Sorry, I'm a little over.
All right. Now we're up for our Q&A session. Please have a seat. Perfect. Are there any immediate questions coming up? Of course.
Make it brief.
Yeah.
So you and I here have had many sort of therapeutic conversations around data culture, how to get people on that path. We saw earlier today an example of an organization like Bayer with Oliver really, thinking ahead when it comes to data, right, and data strategy. Can you give us some examples of thought leaders you're seeing on the data culture side, and what are some of the things that they're doing that you think are great examples for other people in terms of starting that path towards a better data culture?
Yeah, for sure. And I have to be very honest that I think a lot of it has come from outside of industry. So when I got real interested in data culture, and if you do some research on that, there's almost nothing happening in pharma per se, but there is a lot happening outside of pharma. I can tell you on a personal level, we are working with individuals that are very interested in this topic. And so we're actually really surprised to find out how some of the digital technologies are being used. That comes as a surprise. I think there's an understanding that there are data integrity issues, but the idea that there are not issues that are necessarily compliance issues, but are things that will kind of wreck their strategy, that becomes a surprise to leadership. So I see a lot of individuals rolling out information sessions, getting to the shop floor, actually looking. The favorite thing for me is when a top leader actually goes to a system with us and takes a look to understand exactly, contextually, what we're talking about. But if you do a Google search, you'll certainly see McKinsey comes up with data culture, HBR comes up with data culture, but unfortunately, we don't see a lot of it in pharma yet.
All right, next question.
Yeah, so everything you said resonated just on so many different levels, so thank you both so much. My question is, what do you see for the future within non-GXP development data, and how do we, there will be more and more scrutiny on that data, right? You gave the example of trying to go back to it. So what do you see the future? What do these development R&D groups need to be thinking about for how they're handling their data in the future?
Is this for me? I love that question, actually. So the first thing I'll say is, I don't know if you've read the reflection paper from EMA on artificial intelligence yet, or the FDA discussion paper for drug development. Further examples of, as we advance in technology, we're also reaching further back now into these types of areas when it comes to managing our data. And so when I think of the future, and I don't know how many people will love this answer, but data integrity compliance, data governance, it's coming. And that's a reality. And so if I were sitting in the discovery space or the R&D space, understanding that my data is critical, understanding that my data is going to be in this lens, I would be thinking about right now, what is the right amount of data governance for me and what I do? How do I want to manage my data? I can't speak for you, but I can tell you when we work with a lot of these groups, some of them are not even using templates for experiments. Nomenclature is varied depending on who the scientist is or what area. These are, to me, very simple fixes and a good place to start. I don't know that it will ever get to the place where GMP data sits, but I believe very strongly that it can and should, data management and data governance can and should have a place in discovery and development. I hope that helped.
It does. I was just going to add a comment. For me, what resonates is data as an asset. And so that's almost more important in development labs to me as a value driver than the data integrity. But I think if you think about your data as an asset and ensure there's enough governance and enough trust in that data, then I think you get data integrity along with it, if that makes any sense.
I think it can. I think it can. I think it definitely, data integrity has some technical attributes that need to be considered. But I think one of the things that's worth exploring, and dovetailing off one of your comments earlier, when that idea around innovation or that we get slowed down by compliance or we get slowed down by data governance, I think that's like a hot poker. And I think the real leaders between those spaces are going to be those that can come to the table and really explore that. Like, what are the examples? What are we really talking about here? How does it slow you down? What does that really mean? Because I think sometimes what we find out is that it's not going to slow down, or maybe we find out it would, and then we do need to think about that, but I don't know that we'll solve that if we don't go all the way into that challenge.
Right. Next question, thank you.
Would be me, okay. I think it's for either of you, maybe Sue. I heard about data mapping, so within the BioPhorum that you guys are working on. Is there a template that you're looking at? So for going on, to your earlier question, so everybody can create data mapping and the way they want, but is there something that there is a guidance that this is how the mapping template should look like going forward for everything that we're doing, especially in the early development phase of any product? So, thoughts?
I love this question. So I use, and I don't know where he is now. My buddy from lunch, where is he? I know he's going to hit this one out of the park for us there he is. So we were sitting at lunch, and we realized we both use BPMN. So if you're familiar with BPMN, but I couldn't believe it, I almost fell out of the booth. I'm like, yes. And so my answer to you is, of course, there's not a regulatory expectation for this. But for an organization, I'm a fan of standardizing. Why wouldn't you want to make sure, to the extent possible, that folks are pretty much looking at this the same way? So the first thing I would say, I love BPMN too. Obviously, there's standards there. You can take training through that institute. You can get a facilitator. You can get a third party to come in. But then I think there's a lot to that. And so very quickly, I would say you might want to consider a facilitator. You want to make sure you go to the shop floor, because we've seen variations. We've seen where quality and compliance, this is my least favorite scenario, sits at their desk and maps everybody else's processes. I don't know if you've ever seen that. We still see that to this day, right? So again, cross-functional, get up, go to the floor, Gemba the process, really understand how it works. If it's a legacy process, you'll have to collect all that data. So I think there's a lot that goes into it. But yes, to answer the question simply, I'm a huge fan of BPMN 2.0.
So you mean there is a guidance now that we can all follow, or it's working?
There's standards, so BPMN 2 is a standard. The guidance, if you look at the regulatory guidance, what they're going to say is you need to do this. But I can tell you also, I get the opportunity to liaise with FDA quite a bit, and of course I manage inspections. And they're asking for these maps. And so I can tell you some of the things they're saying are, how come you did this process and not that process? So that brings us back to critical data. You'll need justification for that. And they're wanting to see these assets. So I would recommend that an organization think about how to standardize these maps as an asset and drive them consistently across the organization based on risk. But definitely you want to use some kind of standard.
All right, I think we have time for one more question. Okay, Yash again.
Help us understand a little bit like how you. What is the structured product quality submission going to look like?
I don't think we have time for that whole answer.
That's a question I also
Yeah.
had here on my...
I mean, the way I look at it is the challenges that we're solving in regulatory are not new challenges across a value chain of a pharma organization or even across any industry. So where I've worked before, I've worked in commercial, I've worked in, mostly in commercial, but really, a lot of the transformation that's happening now in regulatory has already been done in other areas. And so what's trying to be solved is really, the things like that will make everybody's lives easier and better and more compliant and get patients' drugs accessible quickly. So it's things like getting your data right. The foundational component of the data model is critical, and I like to use the analogy of Lego. So there's this Lego kit of data that you can then put together to serve up for the use cases that you need. So things like structured data is the first easiest thing. So that can just be a JSON file or something very simple that goes to the FDA. Simple. But actually, ultimately, what do you want to do with that data? And so structured data enables machine reading at scale. It enables data analytics trending that you couldn't do. It enables people to go into a database, ask a question, get the information back. That's trusted data, trusted information. And then you can start to do more clever things like structured content authoring. reuse of content, translations at scale, passing your legacy data, PDFs. So all of that is in scope of the next roadmap. So this is where I'm seeing it going, and it will go that direction because this is what needs to happen wholesale for the whole of industry to be able to leverage what's already been done in other areas and really connect it together. But the first starting point is structured data, and that in itself is a huge piece of work, but very valuable. And again, we're starting with simple things or more simple things. And where there was a pressing need, IDMP was driven by the need for global surveillance of safety pharmacovigilance data. And it's a great initiative because you can only pick up trends when you are really looking at that big data at scale. So there's great outputs from that, which the FDA will point to and say we were able to prevent deaths in pediatric patients, which happened outside of US because we picked up on this so quickly and we stopped the product before it came into US patients. So there's a real impact to this stuff. So data sounds like it's a very kind of, everyone talks about data, but it's actually the impact of that data and how you use it that's important. And we're just at the very starting point of this, which is why this room and this whole movement is so powerful. Because without everybody coming together to work together, then we can't make that big change. So, yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. I think we're running out of time, so I think I'm gonna stop it here, and then you can maybe ask over dinner. I think we saw a lot of common sense here across a lot of talks today, and that there has to be a lot of effort put into structured data and then also the culture around it. So thank you again, Keir and Sue. And with that, I would like to hand it over to Luke.
Thank you.